What's up, guys? It is Sam here, and I have gold for you today. Have you ever wondered, after the 2016 election, where the poll said one thing and reality was another thing, like, what's actually going on? Well, that was the same question I had that led me to creating the Instagram rankings, where we take a look at 4 separate factors on the 6th most popular site in the world to understand what reality is versus what polls are saying. So we're going to talk a little bit about the polling. We're going to talk a little bit about where we gathered the data, and then we're going to dive into all that before we get into your questions at the end of the video. If you use the hashtag STOLT, we can actually talk about your questions at the end of the video. With that being said, what's good? My name is Sam, and for those of you who are returning, it is good to freaking see you. Let's get into it. So I have a Real Clear Politics pulled up here, and as we can see, of the 8 or so polls that have been put forth, all of them but one have sample sizes of less than 1,000 people that the media reports on as saying this is what the collective of America is interested in. Yes, they sample less than 1,000 people, and then the media reports that this sample of less than 1,000 people is representative of the collective of what 300 plus million people think. Yeah, that's actually how we do things around here. So I thought maybe there's a more intelligent way of doing that, and that's where I came up with the Instagram rankings. But I wanted to take a look at the one that just came out from QuinPack. So I pulled up their survey here. So you have to dive into it, and a lot of times you can get a PDF for the sampling methodology. And so we got right here, this is the sampling methodology. They had 827 people here, and they do a dual frame. So they gather data in 2 separate ways. Cool, right? Landlines and cell phones. Landlines and cell phones. I don't have a cell phone. I'm 35. I haven't had a cell phone ever, a landline ever. I don't know any of my friends that have landlines. Not one friend of mine that has a landline, unless it's like my dad, right? Nobody else I know has a fucking landline. Why would you have a landline? I just don't understand that. And that is the first, right? Because most of the time when you do, say, the ingredients on a label of something, the ingredients, generally speaking, you're going to put the more prominent thing, right? If you're looking at something and it's like, oh, corn syrup, right? And if that's the first ingredient that's listed, then that means that that's used the most. I don't know if that's the case here or not, but they do put landlines first and then cell phones. So what happens when you do this? First of all, well, think about landlines, right? Well, I don't know. I virtually know nobody who has a landline. Very, very few people I know have a landline. So you exclude a giant portion of the population from your sampling. Second of all, and what they do to get the cell phone numbers is they use a random digit dialing service by Dyneta, which basically just dials phone numbers randomly to like get a hold of somebody apparently. And cool, that's good, right? That's good to randomly call people, but you still have to opt in. I like being able to actually observe people's behavior without actually having them opt in, because the subtle effect of having somebody opt into something changes the outcome. If your boss is sitting behind you watching you work versus your boss is on vacation, how is your behavior going to be different psychologically when you're working? That's what this is happening. If you opt into something, your behavior is going to be different. Hypothetically, randomly, right? I do get a call, okay? And I haven't actually gotten a call. So they somehow get my number, right? And they call that randomly. There's probably somewhere between a 1 to maybe a 10% if I'm like just having an amazing day and I'm like, yeah, I'll pick up the phone, right, from a random number. And then you've got about 1 to maybe 4 or 5 seconds before I hang up on you, because it's a survey and I have better things to do with my time. So I'm not going to ever be participating in these surveys. But what you could do is observe somebody's behavior through what they are actually doing online And that's what we do with the Instagram rankings. So, with that being said, let's jump into it. Instagram is the second most popular website on the frickin' planet, according to SimilarWeb, which ranks websites around the world based upon popularity. So we use Instagram as one of 9 separate factors that roll up into our power rankings. We have our national power rankings. You can check out the channel if you'd like to, where we have our Google search volume, our YouTube search volume, the Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, all these different factors that roll up into our power rankings, which each one of them plays a little factor into the power ranking. So this is the number 6 most popular website in the freaking planet, and we use a website called Social Blade. They track different social profiles across the internet according to the statistics associated with that profile. So I have Bernie Sanders pulled up here, and we look at 4 separate factors. Each one of these factors, we stack rank the candidates 1 through 9 who had the best down to who had the worst. And so the first factor, or one of the factors, is the engagement rate. So this is over the past 20 posts, and this is like likes and comments on that. So you want a higher engagement rate because this is your following, your supporters are more engaged with what you are putting out. So either you're putting out very, very good content, which has to be like a prerequisite. The creative you're putting out there has to be good enough, and the messaging you're putting out there has to be good enough to get people to actually engage with it. So we can see here, Bernie Sanders has a 2.5% engagement rate. So we stacked ranked the candidates on that, and then what we did is we took a look at the total number of new followers over the last 30 days. Which for Bernie is 185,000. We also took a look at the total number of pieces of content that he has created over the last 30 days. And why the total number of pieces of content is important, because if you go to your neighborhood and you knock on 1,000 doors a month and introduce yourself to 1,000 people every month, and you do that time and time again, and I go to your neighborhood and I knock on 6 doors a month and introduce myself to 6 people, who the fuck do you think is going to have more awareness in your neighborhood? The person who shows up the most. It's just what it is, right? Instagram's a community, just like the fucking community you live in. And the more you show up in that community, assuming your message is not completely incompetent and you know what you're doing in terms of the creative and the messaging, like, you are going to get more exposure because you're showing up more. It's simple, pretty fucking basic, right? If you don't have an Instagram account, then you're not going to get any awareness. Think about it that way. Whether you have an Instagram account and you start putting out content, you're going to get awareness. And why do you do this? Well, because think about the amount of exposure you can get from like Instagram versus like doing a town hall. They're both important, but with Instagram, you can make 3, 6, 10 pieces of content a day. You can live stream the town hall, and you can have your message in front of 1 million people that day in terms of exposure versus like the fucking 37 people that show up to the town hall. I have no idea what the numbers are. I don't know if it's 370 people. I have no fucking idea. I've never been to one. I don't watch any of them, so I have no idea how many people show up to any of the candidates' town halls. Whether it's 200 people, whether it's 2,000 people, I have no idea. The amount of exposure you can get to get your message out to more people online is like 10x that with this much work, right? You have to put a lot of work in the real world to get in front of this many people versus you can do the same thing online in terms of this much work, but get in front of like 10x the total number of people that you would have gotten in front of if you'd done it the other way. And I think both are important because the depth of what happens in face-to-face is different than the depth of what happens in online. But online is where you can gain that exposure so that people actually fucking show up to your town hall or come out and vote for you. The next and last one we take a look at is the growth rate in followers over the last 30 days. And this is important because we want to understand how quickly the candidates are gaining ground relative to each other. If you're gaining at 36% and I'm gaining at 4%, right, you're growing substantially faster than me. However, that is important, but we also want to take a look at, well, say you have 100,000 followers and I have 1,000,000 followers, and I'm growing at 4%, 40,000 followers, and you're growing at, and you have 100,000, right? And you're growing at 40%. That's, you get the same amount of followers, but we're getting the same amount of followers, even though you're growing a lot faster than I am, just because your account size is a lot smaller. So this is one of the factors. I took all four of those factors, stack ranking the candidates, each one of those, and put them together to come up with the top 5 candidates. We have Andrew Yang, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. Interesting, Michael Bloomberg is really stepping up in a lot of these things. I've been seeing his name in the top 5, and Bernie's been, Joe has been dropping out. Joe has been moving out of the top 5 in a lot of the factor rankings that we have in our overall power rankings. Pete rounds out the top 5. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are down below in the comment section. If you use the hashtag Stolt, then we can talk about your comment at the end here. Just a couple of quick things that I wanted to highlight here. Look at the astonishing growth rates here. We only have 4 players out of the 9 who are growing pretty quickly. And one who's just destroying everybody else in terms of their growth, and that is Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders had 185,000 new followers on Instagram. That is pretty substantial. He also, I think, has the largest following out of all the candidates and had the most amount of new followers, which is absolutely crazy. Number 2 was Andrew Yang, which is kind of interesting because he has kind of like in the bottom quartile in terms of overall follower count. Like, I think he has maybe more than Tom and Amy and maybe one other person, and probably Tulsi. And so he's in that bottom like third or so of followers on there, but he still gained over 45,000 new followers. Elizabeth Warren gained 40,000. So that was a bit surprising to me because if we look here, she was 7th last time. And the last time we did this at the beginning of the month, and we can see the date today. That's today's date. I think that what happened with Bernie and her on the stage, I think, has helped her out in some degrees and hurt her in others. Because in some of the other rankings, we see her dropping pretty quickly, and she actually has some negative growth on Facebook. Like, there was people who were unfollowing her Facebook page. She was the only person where they were unfollowing her Facebook page. So that's kind of interesting, but it's helping her on Instagram. So every neighborhood, right? If we think about these as neighborhoods, Instagram and Facebook and their YouTube channel and Twitter, every single neighborhood has a slightly different psychology. Think about when you are at dinner with your grandparents, right? And it's some special occasion versus like you're out with your best friend having a drink or smoking or whatever it is that you do and watching or doing whatever your thing is. The behavior you have versus being at dinner with your grandparents, they're 2 different things. And the same thing happens online, like LinkedIn versus Instagram, Twitter versus Facebook, right? The psychology on all these platforms is slightly different. So to see it hurting on Facebook, but see it helping on Instagram is kind of interesting to give us a little bit more understanding of the psychology. I can't draw any conclusions or say anything much more than that. It is interesting to see how that plays out. The only person who seems to be really dropping the ball, I don't know if this is because I feel like the media is probably not really giving her much airtime, but I think that could also be said for Andrew Yang to a certain extent. But Tulsi Gabbard's been losing followers over the last 30 days, which obviously means she's had a negative growth rate. So it's kind of interesting. Another thing, as I just mentioned, we only have a couple candidates 4 candidates here who are posting more than 100 times a month. And that goes again, right? If you show up in your neighborhood 150 times a month, and I show up like Joe does 30 times, who do you think is gonna fucking know more people? Who do you think is gonna get more well known in that neighborhood? Obviously, you have to be good enough in terms of your creative and your messaging. Like, you have to be perceived by the public, the people who are going to see your shit, that you know what the fuck you're doing and your shit's good enough. The last one here, which I think is pretty interesting. Oh, by the way, this factor here is around 60% of the overall score. And these here make up around 40% of the total score. So the vast majority of it is over here. Another important factor is the engagement rate. How engaged are the people who are following your stuff? And over here we have only one person is above 4%. That's Andrew Yang. That is kind of interesting because the next closest person is Tulsi Gabbard, who is losing some followers. Kind of interesting. And he's 1% higher than her. But the top couple people, the next person is Bernie Sanders. He's got more than double the engagement rate of Bernie Sanders. But then again, right? He's got like 500,000 or 600,000 followers. So, and Bernie has like 4.1. So he's about 8 times the size. Bernie Sanders is about 8 times the size. But the engagement rate is more than double for Andrew Yang. So it'll be interesting to see if that engagement rate continues to stay pretty elevated relative to the rest of the field. Because if you look at everybody else, right? Let's take a look at the people who are in the 3s, or pretty close to 3. We've got like 4 people: Tulsi, Tom Steyer, Amy Klobuchar, and Pete Buttigieg. And all of these people, if you look at the average, is 3.23%, which is a percent and a half below where Andrew Yang is. It just seems like it's a abnormally high based on like looking at this kind of data. That seems abnormally high to me, observing this when you have numbers that are so high. Like here, Tom Steyer, he has like, I think like maybe 30 to 40%, maybe 50% of the total followers of Andrew Yang. I think he's around 200,000 or maybe 300,000, and Andrew's probably around 550,000 to 600,000. So you would expect that right here, you would expect potentially, right, if he's getting his message out with with what he is doing, that his growth rate would be higher. But look at the total number of followers between first and him. Even though Tom has, more than double, 2.5 times the growth rate of Bernie, right? The base is just so tiny, right? It was 4 times 4, 16 times smaller, roughly, than Bernie Sanders. And so you'd expect the growth rate to be smaller for Bernie. At least when you look at the data a lot, you would expect that. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are down below in the comment section. Any other noticeable moves? The biggest one was Elizabeth Warren and Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard, ooh, I don't know what is going on with my screen right now, but I don't know what's going on with Tulsi Gabbard either, because she's dropping. Bloomberg is really ramping up. That's interesting to see because he's been stepping up his game in a lot of areas. So the first comment comes from Solomon Small. What's good? Like-dislike ratio. I like that. I'm not sure how I would like to implement something like that in the YouTube rankings. Maybe if I looked at the last 10 videos or something like that, or 10 videos that were published on each candidate's channel, and then added in the likes to dislikes ratio, and we stack rank them in that way. I think maybe I'll add in some more work, because that would be interesting to see that data. Thank you so much for that comment. The next is from Joseph Richardson. Fuck that noise. I apologize if my audio is not super awesome. I will be upgrading that shortly. I'm moving in 2 days. And I'm not sure how all this is going to translate into moving. I'm going to have to switch this to a laptop more than likely. The next comment, so if it is the noise in terms of the audio quality, I do apologize, and thank you for bringing that to my attention, Joseph. If it is the noise in the numbers when you're regarding Michael Bloomberg and the numbers on YouTube, I don't know what's going on. I will continue to follow that, and I will let you guys know if I see something strange. again, with the numbers with Michael Bloomberg. I'm not exactly sure what is going on over there. The next is from Anita Yang. What's good, Anita? How you doing? Bloomberg is taking away from Joe. This is in reference to the website ranking, which is another one of our factors in our overall national power rankings. I think he is. I see Joe Biden slipping out of the top 5 in a lot of these rankings. So I don't know how that's going to play out, but I just don't. I feel like there's more goodwill for a lot of the American public around Michael Bloomberg than there is with Joe Biden. So I think some of that attention that wants like an old white dude, like and their policies or whatever the case is, like maybe they're fucking amazing, right? We I don't know. I don't follow what they actually say, but I think some of that is going to shift to Bloomberg because he's had that goodwill because he was a mayor somewhere. Bernie is in the mainstream media is taking advantage of Hillary's mean girl saying no one likes him. It could be. Bernie's really seen that debate for Bernie was killer. The last debate, I don't remember when it was, but that was a really intelligent move by Bernie, and I don't think he thought about it when Hillary was coming, or sorry, when Elizabeth Warren was coming up, and he had his hand out, and she like pulled her hand back and was like, "Did you just call me a liar on national television?" And just to me, based on that one tiny bit of information, I have no context for what they're saying, I have no context for what's going on, but I'm like, I don't want that type of characteristics in a leader for me if I'm running an organization. So the way that Bernie handled that, I think, was a very intelligent, and I think a lot of the people who saw that are like, yeah, I would much rather have somebody who's going to handle the situation that way, because his numbers have been growing and increasing. His growth rate, the number of followers across a bunch of these factors. You can check out the channel if you want to see any of them. I know you already have, Anita, but this is for everybody else, and I appreciate the comments and the support, Anita. Speaking of support, I did quit my job on December 13th, and I am figuring out how to make a living online. I've got about 15 to 18 months of worth of savings. So if you want to help out, there's a Patreon link in the description, or jump over to one of the other platforms, or just simply press that thumbs up button. That helps out because it tells the YouTube algorithm to share this video with more people. And I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for your time, and I will talk to you soon.